Savannah walked into her cozy suburban home that evening, her mind heavy with thoughts of the future she and her husband Ethan had carefully planned. The house smelled of lavender, their favorite candle burning on the coffee table. It was her safe space, the place where she believed nothing could go wrong. She had spent years building a perfect life with Ethan. They had savings tucked away for their dream home, investments for their future kids, and a plan to retire early to travel the world. Savannah had worked tirelessly as a marketing director, juggling demanding deadlines and sleepless nights, all while Ethan pursued his passion for art. It was their unspoken agreement. She would handle the financial foundation and he would contribute to their happiness in other ways. But that night, something felt off. Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his expression distant. He barely acknowledged her when she walked in. Savannah noticed an empty wine glass on the table, a sign that Ethan had been drinking, something he only did when he was stressed. "Hey," she said gently, setting her bag down. "How was your day?" Ethan muttered something under his breath, barely audible. Savannah frowned. "Ethan, what's wrong? You seem distracted." For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he put his phone down and looked at her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold and unfamiliar. Savannah's heart sank. The tone of his voice sent a chill down her spine. She sat down across from him, her mind racing. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. Finally, he spoke. "I took the money," he said. Savannah blinked, not comprehending. "What money?" "Our savings," Ethan clarified. "All of it." For a moment, time stood still. Savannah stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. You emptied our savings account?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Why?" Savannah's voice rose, a mixture of disbelief and anger. "I needed it for an investment," he said flatly. "An investment? What kind of investment, Ethan?" Ethan sighed as if her questions were an inconvenience. "I bought a gallery space downtown. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Savannah. I couldn't let it slip away." Savannah felt like the ground beneath her feet had crumbled. Their savings were meant for their future, their dreams, their security. And he had used it without even consulting her? "You didn't think to discuss this with me first?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Ethan leaned back, his tone defensive. "I knew you'd overthink it. You always do. That's why I didn't tell you." Savannah couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't the man she had married, the man who had promised to build a life with her. "And what if it doesn't work out?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What happens to us then, Ethan?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Why do you always have to be so negative? This is why I didn't tell you. You never support my dreams, Savannah. You just care about your precious plans and numbers." Savannah was stunned into silence. She had always supported him, encouraged his art, and believed in his talent. But this was a betrayal. "I can't believe you did this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stood up, towering over her. His next words hit her like a thunderclap. "Maybe we should get a divorce if you can't handle it," he said coldly. Savannah's world shattered in that moment. She stared at him, her chest tight with disbelief and pain. Divorce? Over this? But she didn't cry. She didn't beg. Instead, she felt a spark ignite deep within her, a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Determination. Savannah sat frozen on the couch as Ethan's words echoed in her mind. Maybe we should get a divorce if you can't handle it. They weren't just words, they were a challenge, a dismissal of everything they had built together. For a moment, she stared at him, her face a mask of calm, while the storm inside her brewed. Ethan, clearly uncomfortable with the silence, crossed his arms. Well, aren't you going to say anything? He snapped, his voice laced with impatience. Savannah looked up at him, her eyes steady and unwavering. Is that what you really want, Ethan? A divorce? Ethan hesitated, his bravado faltering for a moment. He hadn't expected her to be so composed. I'm just saying, if you can't trust me or support me, then maybe we shouldn't be together. Savannah nodded slowly, as if absorbing his words. Then she stood up, her movements deliberate and calm. All right, she said softly. Ethan blinked. What do you mean, all right? I mean, if that's what you want, Ethan, then all right. We can talk about a divorce. Her calm demeanor unsettled him. He had expected anger, tears, or even an argument. Instead, she was giving him exactly what he asked for. Ethan scoffed, trying to regain control of the situation. You're not even going to fight for us? For this marriage? Savannah tilted her head, a faint, almost unnoticeable smile playing on her lips. Fight for what? For a man who empties our savings without telling me? For someone who calls me unsupportive after everything I've done for us? Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Savannah walked past him and headed to their bedroom. She needed space to think. As she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The weight of the situation was overwhelming, but deep down, she knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. That night, Savannah didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Memories of their relationship flashed before her. Their wedding day, the promises they had made, the sacrifices she had made for him. She thought about the long hours she had worked, the dreams she had put on hold to support him. And now, this. As the first rays of sunlight crept into the room, Savannah made a decision. She wasn't going to let Ethan's betrayal define her. She wasn't going to let his impulsive actions ruin the future she had worked so hard for. If he thought she was going to crumble, he was wrong. The next morning, Savannah got up earlier than usual. She showered, dressed in a crisp white blouse and black trousers, and tied her hair into a sleek ponytail. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw someone she hadn't seen in years, a woman with purpose. Ethan was still asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over him. Savannah didn't wake him. Instead, she grabbed her laptop and headed to a nearby cafe. She ordered a strong cup of coffee, found a quiet corner, and opened her savings account. The empty balance stared back at her like a void. She felt a pang of anger but pushed it aside. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for action. Over the next few hours, Savannah made calls, sent emails, and consulted with financial advisors. She needed to understand the full extent of the damage Ethan had done. She discovered that not only had he emptied their savings, but he had also taken out a loan in their joint name to fund his gallery. Her hands trembled as she hung up the phone. This wasn't just impulsiveness. This was recklessness. Savannah realized she had two choices. She could confront Ethan immediately and risk another blow-up, or she could play it smart and take her time to gather evidence, protect herself financially, and prepare for what was coming next. She chose the latter. Over the next few days, Savannah kept her composure. She didn't mention the savings account or the loan. Instead, she went about her routine as if nothing had happened. Ethan seemed relieved, even smug, as if he believed the storm had passed. But behind her calm exterior, Savannah was working tirelessly. She consulted a lawyer who advised her on how to secure her assets and protect herself in case of a divorce. She also started documenting everything: Ethan's actions, their conversations, even his drinking habits. And then she did something Ethan didn't expect. She started attending art gallery events and networking with curators and collectors. At first, it was just to learn more about the industry Ethan had thrown their money into. But soon, she realized she was actually enjoying herself. Savannah met people who valued her insight, who admired her intelligence and charm. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as Ethan's supportive wife, but as her own person. One evening, as Savannah returned from a gallery event, Ethan was waiting for her. "Where have you been?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "Out," she replied casually, setting her keys on the counter. "Out where?" Savannah turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "At a gallery opening. You know, learning about the industry you've decided to gamble our future on." Ethan's face darkened. "You don't need to get involved in that. It's my project." Savannah smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm not getting involved, Ethan. I'm just observing." Ethan didn't respond. He stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. Savannah watched him go, her heart pounding. She knew she was walking a tightrope, but she didn't care. She was no longer the same woman who had sat frozen on that couch, shattered by his betrayal. She was stronger now, and Ethan had no idea what was coming. Savannah woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The days of tears and self-doubt were over. She was no longer a woman reacting to her husband's betrayal. She was a woman with a plan. The first step in her plan was to get her finances in order. Savannah scheduled a meeting with her lawyer, Hannah Carter, a sharp and no-nonsense attorney who came highly recommended. Sitting across from Hannah in her sleek downtown office, Savannah laid everything on the table: the emptied savings account, the unauthorized loan, and Ethan's gallery investment. Hannah listened carefully, jotting down notes as Savannah spoke. When she finished, Hannah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Here's what we're going to do," Hannah said, her tone firm. "First, we'll ensure that you're protected financially. We'll gather all the documentation we need to prove Ethan's actions were unauthorized. Second, we'll assess the value of any remaining marital assets and see what we can salvage. And third," Hannah paused, a faint smile on her lips, "we'll make sure you come out of this stronger than ever." Savannah nodded, a flicker of hope sparking in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't alone. Over the next few weeks, Savannah worked tirelessly to secure her future. She opened a separate bank account, redirected her paycheck, and began consulting with financial planners. She even started exploring real estate options, determined to have a place of her own if things with Ethan fell apart completely. Meanwhile, Ethan was oblivious to her actions. He was too preoccupied with his gallery project, which, according to Savannah's sources, wasn't going as smoothly as he had hoped. The opening date had been pushed back, investors were pulling out, and Ethan was scrambling to make ends meet. Savannah kept her distance, carefully observing him without giving away her own plans. One evening, Ethan came home in a foul mood. He slammed the door behind him, threw his jacket onto the couch, and poured himself a glass of whiskey. "Rough day?" Savannah asked calmly, sipping her tea. Ethan glared at her. You wouldn't understand. Try me, she said, keeping her tone neutral. He hesitated, then sighed heavily. The gallery's over budget. The contractor screwed up the wiring and now I need more money to fix it. Savannah raised an eyebrow. More money? From where? Ethan avoided her gaze. I'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. Savannah set her tea down, her expression cool and composed. Ethan, I think we need to talk about our finances. This isn't sustainable. He shot her a sharp look. I don't need a lecture right now, Savannah. I've got enough on my plate. She leaned back in her chair, studying him. I'm not giving you a lecture. I'm trying to have a conversation you should have had with me before you emptied our savings. Ethan's face flushed with anger. I already told you it was an investment. You don't understand how these things work. Then explain it to me, she said evenly. But Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Savannah watched him go, a mixture of frustration and resolve coursing through her. He still didn't take her seriously, still believed he could control the narrative. But he was wrong. The next day, Savannah took her plan to the next level. She reached out to the curator of a prominent gallery she had met at a recent event. Her name was Julia, and she was known for her keen eye for talent and her no-nonsense approach to business. Julia, I need your advice, Savannah said during their coffee meeting. Julia smiled warmly. Of course. What's on your mind? Savannah hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. It's about my husband's gallery. He's poured everything into it, our savings, even loans. But I'm worried it's not going to succeed. I want to understand more about this industry so I can protect myself. Julia's expression turned serious. Savannah, the art world is tricky. It's not just about talent. It's about connections, timing, and frankly, luck. If Ethan's gallery is struggling before it even opens, that's a red flag. Savannah nodded, absorbing her words. What would you do in my position? Julia hesitated, then leaned in closer. If I were you, I'd make sure I wasn't tied to his failure. And if you're looking to get involved in the art world yourself, I can introduce you to some people. You're sharp, Savannah. You could do well here. Savannah felt a surge of gratitude and determination. Thank you, Julia. I'd appreciate any help you can offer. Over the next few weeks, Savannah began building her own network in the art world. She attended more events, met collectors and artists, and even started working on a small side project, a marketing campaign for an up-and-coming gallery. Ethan noticed her growing independence but didn't comment on it. He was too consumed by his own problems to realize what was happening. But Savannah wasn't just gaining knowledge, she was gaining confidence. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she had been holding herself back for Ethan's sake. And she was done holding back. One evening, as Savannah was preparing dinner, Ethan walked into the kitchen, his expression tense. I need you to co-sign another loan, he said abruptly. Savannah froze, the knife in her hand hovering over the cutting board. Slowly, she turned to face him. Another loan? She repeated, her voice calm but firm. Ethan nodded, avoiding her gaze. Just until the gallery gets off the ground. It's temporary. Savannah set the knife down and crossed her arms. Ethan, we're already drowning in debt because of your gallery. I can't co-sign another loan. His face darkened. So now you're refusing to support me? After everything I've done for us? Savannah took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. Support you? Ethan, I've been supporting you since the day we got married. I supported you when you quit your job to pursue art. I supported you when you emptied our savings without telling me. And now, you're asking me to risk even more for a project that you won't even let me be a part of. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Savannah cut him off. No, Ethan, I'm done. If you want to gamble everything on this gallery, do it without me. For the first time, Ethan looked genuinely shocked. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Savannah held his gaze, her heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing. She wasn't backing down. Ethan stared at Savannah, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. Her refusal to co-sign the loan had shattered the illusion of control he thought he still had over her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension between them as sharp as a knife. "You're really going to do this?" Ethan finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're going to walk away from everything we've built?" Savannah's expression remained calm, but her heart was racing. "Ethan, I'm not walking away from anything. I'm protecting myself from the mess you've created." Ethan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "You're overreacting. This is just a rough patch. Once the gallery opens, everything will fall into place." Savannah tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "Will it? Because from where I'm standing, you've risked everything on a project you're not even prepared to manage. And instead of taking responsibility, you're blaming me for not blindly supporting you." Ethan's face turned red. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped. "Then make me understand," Savannah shot back, her voice rising. "Tell me why you didn't consult me before draining our savings. Tell me why you took out a loan without telling me. Tell me why my support is only valuable when it benefits you." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time, Savannah saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt, maybe even regret. But it was too late. That night, Savannah stayed in the guest room, unable to face Ethan after their confrontation. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what her life would look like without him. For years, she had built her identity around being Ethan's wife, his partner, his biggest supporter. But now, she realized she'd been giving and giving, while he had taken and taken. It was time to take her power back. The next morning, Savannah got up early and went for a walk. The crisp morning air cleared her head and helped her focus. By the time she returned home, she had made a decision. She wasn't going to wait for Ethan to change. She wasn't going to hope for a miracle. Instead, she was going to take control of her life, one step at a time. Later that day, Savannah sat down with her lawyer, Hannah, to discuss the next steps. "Are you ready to file for divorce?" Hannah asked, her pen poised over her notebook. Savannah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I can't keep living like this." Hannah gave her a reassuring smile. "You're making the right decision, Savannah. We'll make sure you're protected." Over the next few weeks, Savannah began to disentangle herself from Ethan's financial mess. She contacted their bank to separate her accounts, canceled any joint credit cards, and worked with Hannah to document every financial decision Ethan had made without her consent. Meanwhile, Ethan grew increasingly distant. He spent more and more time at the gallery, barely speaking to Savannah when he came home. The few times they did interact, their conversations were strained and filled with tension. But Savannah didn't let it affect her. She had a new focus now, herself. As Savannah threw herself into her work and her new connections in the art world, she began to rediscover parts of herself she had forgotten. She remembered how much she loved creating, brainstorming, and building something from the ground up. One day, while working on a marketing campaign for an up-and-coming artist, Savannah received a call from Julia, the curator who had been mentoring her. "How's the campaign coming along?" Julia asked. "It's going well," Savannah replied. "The artist is excited about the direction we're taking." Julia paused for a moment, then said, "Savannah, have you ever thought about running your own gallery?" Savannah blinked in surprise. "My own gallery?" "Yes," Julia said. "You have the skills, the connections, and the passion. I think you'd be great at it." Savannah felt a surge of excitement and fear. She had never considered such a bold move before, but the idea sparked something inside her. "I'll think about it," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. That evening, Savannah sat down with her journal and began to map out her vision for the future. She wrote down her goals, her dreams, and the steps she would need to take to achieve them. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose. But just as Savannah was beginning to find her footing, Ethan threw another curveball. One evening, he came home and announced, "I sold one of my paintings." Savannah looked up from her laptop, surprised. "That's great, Ethan. Congratulations." Ethan smiled smugly. "It sold for $10,000. See? I told you things would turn around." Savannah forced a smile, but inside, she felt uneasy. Something about his sudden success didn't sit right with her. As Ethan celebrated his sale, Savannah decided to dig deeper. She reached out to one of her contacts in the art world and asked them to look into Ethan's buyer. What she discovered left her stunned. Savannah stared at her phone, her heart pounding as the message from her contact came through. The buyer of Ethan's painting wasn't an art collector or even a legitimate buyer. It was a shell corporation. One look at the paperwork confirmed her worst suspicions. The sale had been a setup, likely orchestrated by Ethan himself to make it look like his gallery was gaining traction. For a moment, she felt paralyzed. This wasn't just impulsiveness or bad judgment. This was deliberate deception. Ethan wasn't just reckless, he was manipulative. Savannah closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe deeply. She couldn't let her emotions take over. She needed to think clearly to stay one step ahead. The next morning, Savannah acted as though nothing had happened. She congratulated Ethan on his success and even suggested they celebrate. Ethan, clearly reveling in the attention, agreed, his confidence visibly restored. But Savannah wasn't celebrating, she was planning. She spent the next few days quietly gathering more information. With the help of her lawyer, Hannah, she obtained financial records, traced transactions, and built a clear picture of Ethan's actions. The evidence painted a damning portrait of his deception. One evening, as Ethan was out at the gallery, Savannah invited Julia over. "I need your advice," Savannah said, handing Julia the documents she had uncovered. Julia scanned the papers, her expression growing darker with each passing moment. When she finished, she set the documents down and looked at Savannah. "This is bad," Julia said. "If this gets out, it could ruin his reputation, and yours, by association." Savannah nodded. "I know. That's why I need to distance myself from him, both personally and professionally." Julia hesitated, then said, "Have you thought about going public with this? Exposing what he's done?" Savannah bit her lip. The idea of exposing Ethan's lies was tempting, but she knew it would come at a cost. "Not yet," she said finally. "I need to protect myself first. Once I'm in a secure position, then I'll decide what to do." Julia nodded, her expression serious. "Whatever you decide, I've got your back." That night, Savannah couldn't sleep. She lay awake, thinking about everything she had uncovered. Ethan's lies, his recklessness, his complete disregard for her trust. It was all too much. But what hurt the most was the realization that the man she had once loved was no longer the man standing in front of her. The next morning, Savannah made a decision. She called Hannah and told her to move forward with the divorce proceedings. "It's time," Savannah said, her voice steady. "I can't keep living like this." Hannah didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll file the paperwork today." As the days passed, Savannah began to take more concrete steps to rebuild her life. She finalized her marketing campaign for the up-and-coming artist, earning praise and recognition from the art community. She also started meeting with investors to explore the possibility of opening her own gallery. Ethan, meanwhile, was too preoccupied with his failing gallery to notice the changes in Savannah. He was constantly on the phone, arguing with contractors and trying to secure funding. But Savannah knew it was only a matter of time before his house of cards came crashing down. One evening, as Savannah was working on her laptop, Ethan burst into the room, his face red with anger. "Did you cancel the joint credit card?" he demanded. Savannah looked up at him, her expression calm. "Yes, I did. It's part of protecting my finances." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Protecting your finances? From me? What are you talking about?" Savannah stood up, meeting his gaze. "Ethan, I know about the fake painting sale. I know about the Shell Corporation. I know about the loans you've taken out in my name, and I'm done pretending everything is fine." For a moment, Ethan was speechless. Then his face twisted with rage. "You've been spying on me? Is this how you repay me after everything I've done for us?" Savannah's voice remained calm, but her words were sharp. "What you've done for us? Ethan, you've lied to me, stolen from me, and risked everything we've built together without a second thought. I'm not spying on you. I'm protecting myself from you." Ethan took a step closer, his fists clenched. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can just walk away and leave me to deal with this mess?" Savannah didn't flinch. "I don't think I can, Ethan. I know I can, and I will." For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension between them almost unbearable. Then Ethan stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, Savannah felt a strange sense of relief. The confrontation had been difficult, but it had also been liberating. She was no longer afraid of Ethan's reactions or his manipulations. She was in control now. A few days later, Savannah received a call from her lawyer. "The divorce papers have been filed," Hannah said. "Ethan will be served within the next few days." Savannah took a deep breath, a weight lifting off her shoulders. "Thank you, Hannah." "You're welcome," Hannah replied. "And Savannah, you're doing the right thing." As Savannah hung up the phone, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she was ready for whatever came next. Because for the first time in a long time, she was living for herself. The day Ethan was served the divorce papers was one Savannah would never forget. She wasn't home when it happened. She had made sure of that. Instead, she spent the day meeting with a potential investor for her gallery. When she returned later that evening, Ethan was waiting for her. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You really did it," he said, holding the papers in his trembling hands. "You filed for divorce." Savannah set her purse down and met his gaze. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just quiet resolve. "Yes, I did." Ethan slumped onto the couch, his head in his hands. "You're just going to give up on us? After everything we've been through?" Savannah sat down across from him, her tone calm but firm. "Ethan, this isn't about giving up. This is about taking back control of my life. I've supported you, forgiven you, and given you every chance to make things right. But you've made it clear that your priorities don't include me." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I thought we were a team." Savannah shook her head, her voice soft. "A team communicates. A team makes decisions together. A team doesn't lie or betray trust. That's not what we've been, Ethan, and you know it." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. "I guess I can't argue with that." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan moved out of the house, and Savannah began the process of rebuilding her life. But rebuilding wasn't just about starting over, it was about reclaiming her identity. She poured herself into her work, finalizing the marketing campaign that had already gained significant buzz in the art community. The artist's gallery opening was a huge success, and Savannah's role in the campaign didn't go unnoticed. Investors began to take interest in her ideas, and before long, Savannah secured the funding she needed to open her own gallery. The day of the grand opening was a culmination of months of hard work and determination. Savannah stood in the center of the sleek, modern space, surrounded by the art she had carefully curated. Guests mingled, sipping champagne and admiring the pieces on display. Julia approached her, a proud smile on her face. "You did it, Savannah. This is incredible." Savannah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Nonsense," Julia said. "You had this in you all along. You just needed to believe in yourself." Savannah looked around the room, taking it all in. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. As the evening went on, Savannah found herself reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the hard decisions. It had all been worth it. Because she had discovered something far more valuable than a marriage that no longer served her. She had discovered herself. Weeks later, Savannah received an email from Ethan. The subject line was simple: "I'm sorry." She hesitated for a moment before opening it. The message was brief but heartfelt. Ethan apologized for his actions, admitting that he had let his pride and ambition blind him. He told her he hoped she was doing well and that she deserved all the success in the world. Savannah closed the email and sat back in her chair. She didn't reply, not because she was angry, but because she didn't need to. She had already made peace with the past. Months turned into years, and Savannah's gallery became one of the most respected names in the art world. She built a team of talented individuals who shared her vision and expanded her network to include artists from all over the globe. But more importantly, Savannah built a life she was proud of, a life that was hers and hers alone. And as she stood in her gallery one quiet evening, surrounded by the beauty she had created, Savannah smiled to herself. She had lost everything she thought she wanted, and in doing so, she had gained everything she truly needed.